Welcome to Beyond the Label, a raw, real-life look at living with disabilities, presented by Century Martial Arts, the world leader in martial arts since 1976. CenturyMartialArts.com for everything that is martial arts. And now your host, Mike D. and JD.
Welcome to Beyond the Label. I'm Mike D.
And I'm JD.
And if you're asking, what is Beyond the Label? Well, that's good because we're trying to answer that ourselves. But no, honestly, this is a podcast. Well, it's a podcast about living in an adaptive world, and you know, God, I'm rusty.
And you're trying to figure this out right now, aren't you?
Yeah.
Let me tell you what Beyond the Label is, all right?
Yeah.
So Beyond the Label is a podcast about living with a disability. Because oftentimes, you know, people will say, well, what is it like to live with a disability or something? And everybody's got to be, you know, politically correct. And you really don't get the true essence of living life with a disability, living it beyond the label. So we're going to take you beyond the label in this podcast. Mike D and I have been friends for, 30?
My goodness. I'm not that old. No, so 20-something years. At least.
All right, 20-something years. And Mike and I have a pretty good relationship where Mike can ask me anything he wants, and I won't get offended. I don't really get offended when anybody asks me anything, but Mike's not afraid to ask the questions. So Mike's going to ask the questions, and I'm going to give you the straight answers.
So one of the unique things about this podcast is, you know, Jason lives with cerebral palsy, and I don't. So for me, this is a learning experience. And, you know, as much as I'm here to ask questions, you know, this podcast isn't just for people with disabilities or just for people with not. This is for anyone who wants to learn more about what it's like to live in that environment, and who maybe has somebody in their family or a friend of theirs that they may not feel comfortable asking them these questions, or may just want to learn more without having to ask them directly. So,
you know, and this thing isn't just going to be you and I. It's going to be eventually we're going to bring other folks in to talk about their disabilities and their experiences. And we're going to talk about real life stuff. I mean,
I still think we need to bring your wife and your mom on this podcast to talk about what it's like living with you.
You might get my wife on. My mom, probably not. Not going to happen. But anyway, I mean, we're going to ask the real life questions. I mean, you know, what is it like? You know, what is your day to day like? What sort of things do you do? What sort of things do you actually need help with? What's it like to own a home and to be married? And what's that relationship like, and what were those relationships like building them and things like that?
And you know, I think it was the first time I brought my son to your house, he was all like just enamored by the fact that you had an elevator on your staircase. You know, and it's those type of things, right? Where you know, I've sat next to people on airplanes having conversations about what you do and about the Adaptive Martial Arts Association and about people living with disabilities. And this one gentleman is like, you know, his passion is about the dogs that people bring around with them, right? What do they call it? Service dogs. But he's passionate about people having service dogs, but he's also really passionate about people who abuse the service dog name just so they can bring their dog with them places. So we'll have people like that with us. It's not dedicated to, hey, I live my life with a disability. It's dedicated to educating people about what it is to live beyond this label. So today is more or less going to be me just kind of interviewing Jason and then going through his story, because his story is just as important as anyone else's. Jason has been a friend of mine for years, as he said. We met when we were probably, 17, 18 years old, maybe even younger.
Yeah, something like that.
And we've worked in radio together, which is why a podcast seems like the right thing to do. I'm on the board of his Adaptive Martial Arts Association now. And
nice to have you with us, VP.
Thank you. And, you know, for us to do this type of medium, to put this podcast out there that isn't about necessarily adaptive martial arts, but is about living with this label in life, is something that we can do to go and help out other people, we hope. So let's talk about you.
All right, yeah.
Which is like your favorite thing to do, right? Is talk about yourself.
I've been told I do pretty well at it, but let's see. You be the judge.
So, Jason, you know, let's start at the beginning. You know, you and I met when we were younger, and I feel like I don't remember whether you were in a wheelchair or not at the time.
We met through the radio station, so at that point I was out of the wheelchair and onto the crutches. But the thing is we got talking after we got into radio together, and it was almost like we were connected even younger because we had some mutual friends, and so you knew of me.
I knew of you and you knew of me, and we probably ran into each other.
Right.
So the one thing for people who are listening who aren't from the area, Jason and I live in a relatively small area. We live in a state that has less than 600,000 people that live in the state. We live in a town or a set of towns that are neighboring that have less than 40,000 people in the neighboring towns. So it's not hard to know someone else in these areas. It's not like living in Boston. It's like, oh, I know that guy, even though he lives halfway across the state. So let's get into this. I mean, when I first met you, you were on crutches at the time, and for me, just with who I am and how I was raised, my first reaction was to not ask any questions. Right? I remember my parents telling me, it's like, if you see somebody with a disability, you don't ask about it. That's rude. You don't reference it. You don't ask about it. So tell me what's wrong about that at first, because to me now, I know that that's probably not the best way to approach things.
So it's weird because as you were talking to me, and so part of my head is going, I understand that side of the coin of just kind of being polite about it. And at the other side of the coin, it was almost like I started to sort of feel upset inside. Not sad, but just upset that you weren't given the opportunity to find out the answers then and start to be comfortable with it then. And so I think it's important for people, although you want to be polite and things, I think it's important to just expose your children to this as early as possible.
So one of the things you'll notice we do on this show is we're going to call it the label. We're not going to call it a disability. We're not going to call it a handicap. We're going to call it the label. So living with the label of what you've had or trying to go beyond that, right? You and I first talked, when we had this conversation, you would have been comfortable with me asking. Right? Right. Jason, at 18, would have been comfortable with me, Mike, at 18, saying, so, hey, what's with the crutches? Right? Or saying it in a polite way that was not offensive. But we also talked about that other people aren't comfortable with those questions either, which is why most people tend to shut down and just avoid it. So, I mean, maybe we could look at this from both sides. Let's look at it from my side. Like, what would you have had me do that would have been more comfortable for that situation? And then how does somebody who doesn't know how the other person is going to react kind of work from that,
The thing is the way you said it, what you just said there. Hey, what's up with those crutches? That's okay to me. That's a good way to put it.
It's not super sensitive. I'm not pandering to like some, I'm not yelling at you saying, hey, what's up with those crutches? Like you're deaf too, right? You know what I mean?
That
happens a lot. I see it firsthand. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's...
He speaks Spanish. He's not deaf. Anyways, sorry. Anyway, but a casual, like, because the thing is to remember, and stop me if I'm wrong here, but you're still a human being, and it's just part of your life.
Absolutely. For most people with a disability, I mean, it's just part of their life, and they're used to it, and some people do handle it better than others, but there's no magic way to handle it. So I can't tell you, handle every situation this way or every situation is going to be positive. But I think at the end of the day, whether you get the reaction you were hoping for, I think at the end of the day, when this person is sitting back at the end of the day, they're going to respect you for saying, can you tell me more?
Well, which is really interesting because that's not how we were taught as kids. In school, they teach you to ignore the issue. They don't teach you to address the issue. And when I'm talking about that, I don't mean like world issues. I mean specifically handicaps and disabilities and labels of that nature. They're like, oh, just let this person who can't pay attention in class sit in the corner and just pretend like they're not there, which seems so counterintuitive. And I don't think anybody means any harm by that.
It's because they don't know how to deal with it.
It's because they don't know how to deal with it, right? So
right, and that's what we're hoping to do with this podcast is
not just this one particular podcast either. This podcast series as a whole, right? We're not going to solve all the problems in one podcast. Right?
I'd like to, but it's more than I can handle, bro. First of all, you got to be honest with yourself. Do you really want to know the answer? If you do, ask the question. If you don't, if you're uncomfortable with it, you might maybe do a little research yourself first or something like that to get yourself comfortable. You've got to be comfortable.
Otherwise, it's just going to come across as creepy.
Right. Okay. You creep me out all the time, but that's not the...
I mean, seriously, though, if you think about it, what's the difference between a guy who asks a girl on a date that's creepy versus not, right? One is just a level of confidence. So if you understand if you understand a little bit and you have a little bit of insight, you're going to be more confident asking the question.
I'd rather have you ask and get the answer.
And I hate to generalize, but do you think that the people feel the same way as you do?
As far as I can tell, for the most part, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the thing for me, and I'll tell you, everybody's like, oh, their little kid is like watching you walk down the mall, and and I don't mind that because it's a little kid and they're inquisitive.
Curious.
Right. I think that's awesome. But when you're an adult and you're doing that, it's like, dude, what's your problem? Why don't you just say, hey, what's up with you? If something was up with you, I'd say, hey, what's up with you? So just...
Well, I'm naturally nosy. I don't hold back much. I'm always polite. I'm not going to be rude about it. There's only been once or twice in my life that I've run into somebody who did not like the fact that I asked about something going on with them. Most people take it as genuine concern or curiosity. And that's a different lesson that I'm trying to teach my children.
How was that, the negative reaction?
The negative reaction, I asked a woman about her arm. She had it in a sling. And I asked what had happened. I said, "Is just from the standpoint of, is everything okay? Is there anything I can do for you? What happened to your arm?" And when I got to the question about, obviously showed genuine concern before, and when I got to the question about the arm itself, she got very, very defensive and says, my personal health issues are mine to deal with. And then, she's like, I don't appreciate you asking that question. I said, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend. I'm just curious. So. And I just moved on. I
think that's the best way to handle it. Just what you did is how I would have handled it. And, the other thing, Mike, is people, they automatically assume because I have a disability that I'm not uncomfortable about other disabilities, or they feel like we're all this cohesive group. I can tell you, buddy.
Are you mentally linked?
I can tell you, buddy, it ain't that way. So I guess what I'm telling you is, it's all right to feel a little bit uncomfortable, and it's all right to not know what to do and to have that feeling of, oh my God, I just got to get out of here. That's okay, because I have those same feelings too. And through my work here with the organization, I've gotten better at that. And I've just learned to ask the questions and become comfortable with it. And I'm more a part of that cohesive group than I ever was before.
I mean, listen, and don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say that we break the social norms that we teach our children anyway, right? I'm not trying to say that we do away with things like, don't stare and don't ask questions and mind your business. I don't want my children going up to any stranger and just starting to ask them random questions. There's a little bit of being polite in general in life. I think the lesson here is that there's a human being behind the crutches, and they're pretty normal aside from their dedicated situation. And even that dedicated situation is their version of normal. That's their version of everyday life. So to interact with that person in a way that's abnormal is in and of itself a pain in the rear for the other person, right?
And to be honest with you, it's not disrespectful to me to have you ask the questions and learn.
Right.
It's disrespectful when you treat it that way, when you're like, oh, this dude's different, because I'm no different.
Well, and you're not any different. And I can say that firsthand from working with you for so long. I'd go over and work with Jason, and every once in a while you kick the crutches. And, if I were uncomfortable, just because they're there lying on the ground, you know what I mean? And if they make a good noise, you can't miss that sound, you know what I mean? And if I were uncomfortable with that, and if I had spent 10 years working with you, and I never got around to asking or never got around to dealing with the fact that this is part of your life, those moments would have been so uncomfortable for me. Now it just feels like, Jason, your crap's in the way again. Can you please move it? You know what I mean?
The weird thing for me, and when I know somebody accepts it, is when they're helping me down the stairs and they forget to give the crutches back. Or if we're going to go somewhere, the crutches are out of reach, and they stand there and they give me this deer in the headlight look, like, why the heck aren't you moving yet? That's when I know.
Let's ask another question. Let's go in a slightly different direction. You've grown up with an extremely supportive family. You're married to a woman who doesn't have a disability. Your parents don't have disabilities. I mean, you're surrounded by people who don't have to fight the challenge of living with the label, but at the same time, they always help you fight that challenge. And when I say that, I'm not talking about your physical disability. I'm talking about the way people treat you because you have one. Whether that's being told that you can't do martial arts because they're afraid you're going to get broken, or whether being told you can't participate in certain events or certain things because of how you are. You know, I'm sure that's hard on you as a person, but maybe tell us a little bit about how your family has dealt with and interacted with those situations growing up.
Oh, great question, Mike. But you know what? I'm going to leave you hanging. I'll answer you right after this.
Beyond the Label, presented by Century Martial Arts for everything that is martial arts. It's no secret, every martial artist, no matter their age, dreams of becoming a legend. Having their name listed among the greats like Bruce Lee, Chuck Norris, and Jackie Chan. You can hide it or deny it, but you know it's true. Being a legend takes raw talent, dedication, big breaks, and an ability to survive a roller coaster called fame. But it also takes one more thing to go with it: the best gear and equipment in the world. From the company that is martial arts, Century Martial Arts. They aren't just another martial arts supplier that's never set foot on a mat. They are martial artists, and that means they know their products and use what they sell. From uniforms and training gear to weapons and equipment, Century has it all for every martial arts style. Although you may never be listed among the greats, you can still shop like one at CenturyMartialArts.com and unleash your legend within. Century Martial Arts, the world leader in martial arts since 1976. You're listening to Beyond the Label, a raw, real-life look at living with disabilities, presented by Century Martial Arts. Check them out at CenturyMartialArts.com. Now back to the show with Mike D and JD.
Hey, I'm JD.
I'm Mike D.
And welcome back to the podcast. Hey, Mike, before the break, you asked me an awesome question. You want to repeat it for our listeners and I'll answer it?
You know, you've grown up with an extremely supportive family. You're married to a woman who doesn't have a disability. Your parents don't have disabilities. I mean, you're surrounded by people who don't have to fight the challenge of living with the label, but at the same time, they always help you fight that challenge. And when I say that, I'm not talking about your physical disability. I'm talking about the way people treat you because you have one. Whether that's being told that you can't do martial arts because they're afraid you're going to get broken, or whether being told you can't participate in certain events or certain things because of how you are. You know, I'm sure that's hard on you as a person, but maybe tell us a little bit about how your family has dealt with and interacted with those situations growing up.
You know, the thing for me growing up, I mean, ever since I can remember, I was raised like my other brothers and sisters. If they were doing dishes, I was doing it too. If they were out doing wood, I was doing it too. There was just no excuses, and I never thought of myself as having a disability. This was normal to me, and they treated it that way. Obviously, there were things that I couldn't do, but I always had a part in everything in some small way, so I always felt like I could do it. And I think that was what's important. They always found a way to include me in whatever was going on, and they never took excuses for me not to be able to contribute in some way. And as you were asking that question, I got to be honest with you, I got a little emotional for just a quick second for me, because the way my family handles it, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how I would if, I mean, you think about, you know, you're bringing this baby home from the hospital and you're figuring life is going to be normal, and it's as normal as we make it, and we figured out how to adapt to it. But that had to be as scary as hell.
Right.
You know, what do I do? What are his capabilities? And I mean, I had so much stacked against me. I mean, they went through a point of not knowing if I was going to survive, and you know, what do you do with that? And then how do you integrate that into the
rest of the family, into the world around him, right? Or her.
I don't know. They had it pretty figured out from day one, and I can't tell you. I mean, there's no better way. And even my extended family, I had a cousin who, for the longest time, I thought he was my brother because he was always at our house. He spent vacations there, and when you're little, time runs together. So it seemed like he was always there, and I always thought he was one of the brothers, and I was never looked at any differently. And if anything, they always figured out ways or adaptations to make me be able to do what they were doing.
To be involved with what they were doing.
Right.
Not the other way. Right. So they didn't adapt their behavior to do things around you. They adapted their behavior to include you with what they were doing.
Right.
And that's, I mean, to me, that's, I mean, I didn't grow up with this. You got to understand. So this is me learning as we go, and we're having this conversation here because I've seen your parents. I've seen how they treat you. I mean, they treat you just like the rest of their family. If you do something stupid, they treat you like you did something stupid. You know what I mean? You don't get any extra grace because you happen.
No, stupid, buddy. It doesn't matter what you got.
And then nobody here knows Jason's parents, but hopefully over time you'll get to know them just by knowing Jason. Wonderful people who have just, I'd say they've given everything to Jason. They've given everything that they have to Jason. They drive him places. They take care of him. But what's amazing is they do the same thing for any of their kids. I don't see them treating you extra specially. They might need to spend a little more time helping you with certain things, but honestly, you're just another person to them. And that is a testament, right?
Thing was, like, when I was growing up, it's funny because I told you my brothers, they're all older, and I really looked up to them, and my cousin was around the house, and my brother was on the wrestling team in high school for a short time. And I used to watch, WWE as a kid, or WWF back then and back in the day, and wanted to be the Hulkster brother, you know what I'm saying? And so I used to wrestle with my brothers, and in the beginning, 5, 6, 7, my mother would say, "You stop, you're gonna hurt him, cut it out, stop doing that." Well, she finally realized, and it didn't take long, that I was egging on my brothers and my cousin, and what I got coming to me was exactly what I deserved. And she finally said, because I would, they'd get me in like the double chicken way, and I'd yell, "Ma!" And she was like, finally, like, no, you brought it on, you figure it out. If you're gonna mess around,
don't play the ma card.
Yeah, that's what you're gonna. That's what you're gonna get. And I think that made me. I mean, that really made me tougher for it. You know what I mean?
I mean, look, if you can't tell from the past 15 minutes, Jason's just a normal guy living in a normal world, and he happens to have a physical situation where he can't move certain muscles in certain ways, and he has to rely on, devices like crutches or people to help him. The label of disability at that point, if we look at it from that perspective, what does it mean to you? And do you think it means the same thing to people outside of your world?
It's weird because when I got into this, you just assume that kind of everybody looks at it the same way you do, and conversations went well until they found out that I was born this way. For somebody that's been paralyzed or something like that, and it was like, to me even, they're going, yeah, how can you sit there and tell me to look at every day and do the best I can do and look at it like my glass is half full and you don't get what it's like to be me? And the conversation would shut down, and then I would feel like maybe I did something wrong, but I realized that I didn't do anything wrong. That's my approach to it. Mm-hmm. And theirs may be different, but my point of that approach was to, all you can do is live in the moment and be where you are now. You can't wish and look back on the past. Take where you are, figure out what you want to do, figure out how you're going to get there, and do it. Because that's all you've got is this moment, and from here forward. And so I didn't mean to offend anybody, but
so for you, the label of disability, since you've been growing up with it since birth, for you, that label is nearly non-existent. You could change it to say something like, I have a challenge that I have to work with, just like anyone has a challenge that they have to work with.
That's really how I look at it. It's just a challenge.
So a couple of things that we've learned just on this one podcast, right? That not everybody's the same in these situations. You have cerebral palsy, and there could be 7 other people with cerebral palsy that have different perspectives on this.
Oh, and I can tell you that the severity of the cerebral palsy could be very, very different. And it is very, very different for each person.
Not just the severity, but the attitude is what I'm talking about, right? We've met people who grew up in families and in situations that didn't have the same support system, so to speak. and they don't have the best attitudes in life, or maybe they think they have a good attitude, but they're depressed, or whatever the situation. What I'm trying to highlight, and I don't mean to complicate the situation here, is regardless of whether there's a disability involved or not, people still have an attitude, and that attitude is something that they have the capability of changing. They have the capability of being in a negative state of mind or in a positive state of mind. And what I envy about you is that you always seem to be in a positive state of mind, regardless of your situation. And this is part of what living beyond the label is. And this is my understanding of it as somebody who doesn't have to live with the label, is that you can change your environment in your world by being positive about it. If you're a mother who has a child with a disability, if you're a cousin of somebody with a disability, you have to understand that to them, that's just part of normal life. And that label of disability shouldn't define who they are as a person in your eyes. And I think that's what we want to convey with this podcast.
It's just, you got two choices in this game, and it's like this. You can look at what you got going on from a negative aspect, or you can look at what you got going on from a positive aspect, try to take that positive aspect and help others. And that's what I'm trying to do. That's the best way to handle it. There's really no other way, because the other way, you're going to be miserable, and you're making the people around you miserable. And yeah, the situation isn't the greatest, but those were the cards you were dealt, so just play them.
Yeah. Look, we can't break a stigma in one podcast. I know that. But what we can do is point out some of these incongruencies and inconsistencies, and we can make some people aware. This podcast is for anyone who deals with someone with an adaptive issue in their lives, someone with a disability, someone with a physical or mental handicap. And we're using labels to point out the fact that there's 700 different labels for these things. And
we all sit back and do this for just 1 second. Sit back and do it. We all have got something. So we're all adaptive. We're all
everybody
disabled.
Has their challenges, man.
Right.
Everyone. And that's why this podcast, and we hope this podcast rings true and is helpful to people, because Jason's got CP. I have ADHD. I don't actually consider ADHD a handicap, quite frankly. I think I take it very positively. It was funny. I heard this guy talking, and he says ADHD allows me to do many different diverse things and multitask in ways that other people can't. Right. And as funny as that is, it's true. I have advantages because of it, but that's not the point. The point isn't what I have or what Jason has. The point is we're going to try to expose as many people to the fact that there is life beyond this label, whatever that label happens to be. We're going to try to give you the tools to understand that you can be comfortable around people that live with these labels, why the situations they run into with the labels that they have may even be more handicapping than the actual problem that they have, how the label has held them back, how the label has made them feel, and why it's important to treat people as equals from this standpoint, just like we try to do with race and with sexuality and with creed and religion. There's also a level of respect that needs to be had in this arena as well. And we hope that this podcast can just help enlighten and inform and enable people to be aware.
There's no better way. I mean, there's no better way to really wrap this show than what you said right there.
Well, then we'll stop talking, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Label. If you would like to be a guest on an upcoming episode, email contact@adaptivemartialarts.org. Beyond the Label is produced by JD Production and presented by Century Martial Arts, the world leader in martial arts since 1976. CenturyMartialArts.com for everything that is martial arts.